I never imagined it would come to this, standing on the land my grandfather had passed down to me, staring at a giant, ugly construction sign planted right in the middle of the yard. The thought barely registered at first. It was as if my mind couldn't quite process what my eyes were seeing. My name's Sarah Clark, and this land, this plot of earth, was supposed to be my family's legacy. I grew up running through these fields, helping my grandfather tend to the soil and listening to his stories about the history of the land. He'd always talked about how important it was to keep the property in the family, how it was more than just land, it was a piece of our history, a connection to something larger than any of us. I was supposed to carry that legacy forward, just like he'd always planned. But here I was, standing in front of a construction site, the once lush grass now churned into dirt, the peaceful sound of birds and wind replaced by the hum of power tools and the chatter of unfamiliar voices. I could hardly believe it. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice shaking before I even realized it. A worker in a hard hat turned around, wiping sweat from his forehead as he gave me a confused look. "Yeah?" he asked. "What's going on here? What are you doing on this land?" He glanced at the sign next to him, then back at me. "New development, ma'am. Gonna build some condos right here." Condos. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, condos?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "This land is..." I stopped myself, trying to gather my thoughts. "This land belongs to me. It's been in my family for generations. What right do you have to build here?" The worker looked uneasy now. "I'm just following orders, ma'am. The developers are the ones you'll want to talk to." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I walked past him, the overwhelming sense of loss washing over me. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for any of it. When I reached the back of the property, I saw the developer's truck parked near a pile of debris. A man in a suit stood there, clipboard in hand, scribbling something down. I marched up to him, my emotions boiling over. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it was hard. "I'm Sarah Clark. This is my land. Why are you here?" The man didn't even look up from his clipboard at first. "Oh, you must be the new owner. I was expecting you." "Excuse me?" I blinked, confusion seizing me. He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "The land has been sold, ma'am. I'm just overseeing the project." "Sold?" My mind raced. "That's impossible. This land's been in my family for over a century. There's no sale." He shook his head. "I'm afraid the paperwork says otherwise. You'll need to speak with my supervisor." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. The very ground that had once felt like home, like a part of me, was slipping away. I could feel the weight of the betrayal settling on my shoulders. My grandfather wouldn't have sold the land. He couldn't have. I needed answers, but for now, all I had was an aching emptiness. I walked back to my car in a daze, the sound of the construction noise blending with the frantic pounding of my heart. How could this be happening? How had they done this? How had they taken what was rightfully mine? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, staring at the man in the suit who had just casually claimed that my grandfather had sold the land. The audacity of it took my breath away. I walked over to the workers who were still milling about, making sure to keep my voice calm. Though I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it together. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to ignore the thumping of my pulse in my ears. "Who's in charge here?" A few of the workers glanced at each other, then one of them pointed to the man standing near the trucks, clipboard in hand. He was a few years older than me, well-groomed, and had the kind of face that exuded confidence, too much confidence. He smiled as I approached, and I knew right away he was trouble. "You must be the new owner," he said, extending a hand. Stephen Marks. We're really excited about the development here. Excuse me? My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't hold back. What are you talking about? This land belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandfather. There's no development happening here. Stephen's smile didn't falter. He looked at me like I was the one who was confused. Oh, I understand. But the paperwork shows that your grandfather sold the land to us a few months ago. We have full legal rights to this property. I froze. Sold? The word didn't sound right coming from his mouth. My grandfather never mentioned anything about selling the property. My voice trembled now, and I tried to steady it, to make sense of the words coming from him. Stephen's smile widened, but there was a coldness behind it that made my stomach twist. Your grandfather signed all the documents. Everything's in order. We've been working with the lawyers to make sure the deal was clean. He paused, looking me over, almost sympathetically. I know this must be difficult, but we've got a whole project lined up here. I'm sure you can understand the opportunity. It's for the community. I could feel the knot in my chest tighten. What community? This land was never about development. It was about keeping the family legacy alive. My grandfather wouldn't have sold it. He wouldn't have. But Stephen was already cutting me off, his voice smooth and soothing. I understand that this is a lot to take in, but it's all very legal. And, you know, sometimes people make tough decisions, especially when there's a lot of money involved. The deal was made, and we're moving forward. I shook my head, the words feeling like a punch. No. This doesn't make sense. I felt a sudden wave of heat rush to my face. You're lying. You're taking advantage of something my grandfather would never have agreed to. I won't let you get away with it. He held up his hands, like he was trying to calm me. I'm not trying to make this harder than it has to be, Sarah. It's just business. Your family's name will be remembered, and you'll walk away with something too, I'm sure of it. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought to hold back tears of frustration. How could they do this? How could they take everything my grandfather stood for and just throw it away like it meant nothing? My grandfather had always made me feel like this land was sacred, like it belonged to us, to our family's history. And now this stranger was telling me it had been sold, without my knowing, without any mention of it. I turned and walked away from him, every step heavier than the last. I couldn't hear him calling after me. All I could hear was the pounding in my head, the sound of betrayal echoing through me. I couldn't just sit around and let this happen. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. My grandfather's land, the place I had spent countless summers running through fields, listening to stories, feeling like I was connected to something bigger, was being stolen. I wasn't going to let that go without a fight. The first step was to understand what exactly had happened, so I went to the local archives. I pored over documents for hours, the smell of old paper filling the air, the scratch of my pen on notepaper the only sound in the room. Every deed, every agreement. I needed to know what was real and what wasn't. But the deeper I dug, the more confused I became. The records were a mess. There was no sale agreement, nothing that showed my grandfather had ever sold the property. But then I found it, something I hadn't expected. A forged signature. It was my grandfather's name, but it didn't look right. The letters were off, the loops too tight. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an oversight or a mistake. This was intentional. Someone had forged his signature to make the sale look legitimate. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the document. Every word in it was a lie. I couldn't believe it. How had they done this? How had they gotten away with it? My grandfather's signature wasn't just faked, the entire agreement was a fabrication. There were dates that didn't add up, numbers that didn't match, and I could almost feel the tension in the air as I connected the dots. Someone, likely Stephen Marks, the developer, had orchestrated this from the start. I needed help. I reached out to a local lawyer, Rachel Whitaker, who had been a friend of my grandfather's. I hoped she could make sense of the mess I was staring at. "Sarah, this is a nightmare," Rachel said when I showed her the documents. "These signatures are absolutely forged. I don't even know how they thought they could get away with this." I could feel my frustration rising, my hands shaking as I handed her the papers. "What do I do now? How can they just take what's mine?" Rachel's voice softened. "You're going to fight this, Sarah. And I'm with you every step of the way." I spent the next few days consumed by it. Sleepless nights, poring over the documents, making notes, trying to figure out how this had happened and who was behind it. The weight of betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud. My grandfather had been a man of honor, and now someone had twisted that legacy into a lie. The more I learned, the more I felt like I had to do something. This wasn't just about land. This was about protecting my family's name, their history. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I stood in the small office, surrounded by papers and files, and made a vow to myself. No matter how hard it got, I wasn't backing down. I'd fight for this land. I'd fight for my family's honor. And I'd make sure the people who had done this faced the consequences. This fight wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about showing the world that the truth mattered. That the people who did this, who lied, who forged, who stole, couldn't just get away with it. The more I fought, the harder they came at me. It started with phone calls, then emails. And then, Henry Stone. I should have known the developers wouldn't let this go. But I wasn't prepared for him. Henry was smooth. Too smooth. I didn't trust him the moment I saw him. He showed up at my door one Thursday afternoon, looking every bit the part of a corporate shark. Tailored suit, sharp tie, briefcase clutched in his hand like it held the secrets to the universe. I hadn't agreed to meet with him, but he wasn't here to ask for permission. "Ms. Clark, I'm Henry Stone," he said, offering me a cold handshake. "I represent Mark's development." I took a step back, already feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. "I know who you are. What do you want?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you know why I'm here. We've had some legal setbacks, and I wanted to personally offer a chance for you to reconsider your position." I crossed my arms. "I'm not backing down, Mr. Stone. You have no right to that property." He exhaled, like he'd expected this. "I understand your passion, Ms. Clark. But let me put it bluntly. Fighting this development is going to cost you a lot. The legal fees alone will drain your savings, and if you lose, which is highly probable, you risk losing more than just the land. Your reputation, your finances, everything." My pulse quickened, and I tried not to let the fear creep in. "I don't care about your threats. I'm not selling. This land belongs to my family." Henry leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a lower, more menacing tone. "You'd be wise to consider your options carefully. We have the resources, and we will stop at nothing to protect our investments. People who go up against us, well, let's just say they don't often come out unscathed." I stared him down, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you implying?" He stood up straighter, all politeness gone now. "I'm simply warning you, Ms. Clark. This is bigger than you think. Walk away now, and you can go back to your life. Keep pushing this, and you'll regret it." I didn't flinch. "You can try, but I'm not going anywhere." Henry's smile returned, but it was colder than before. "We'll see. Good day, Ms. Clark." He turned on his heel and left. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. What did he mean by regret it? The threats were clear now, not just legal but personal. That night, I barely slept. The pressure was starting to take its toll. I tried to focus on the case, but the constant fear of losing everything was overwhelming. What if he was right? What if I couldn't afford this fight? I had bills to pay, a career to maintain. This case was swallowing me whole. I called my neighbors the next day, hoping for some support. "Have you heard from the developers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Most of them avoided my calls. A few spoke to me briefly but offered no real help, their voices low and hesitant. I could hear the fear in their words. No one wanted to get involved. I was on my own. My family's legacy, my future, it was all on my shoulders. I felt more isolated than ever, like I was fighting not just against the developers, but against the world. I couldn't keep doing this on my own. The isolation, the pressure, it was suffocating. The developers had their army, their lawyer, their endless resources. But I had me. One afternoon, as I was walking back from the courthouse, feeling more beaten down than I had in days, I bumped into Eddie Turner. "Eddie?" I called, surprised to see him standing outside his old farmhouse, one of the few remaining properties left unscathed by development. He looked up, his face crinkling into a warm smile. Well, if it isn't Sarah Clark. What brings you out this way?" His voice was full of that easy warmth I remembered from childhood. Eddie had always been more than just a neighbor. He was the kind of person who knew everyone's history, the one who remembered the land's roots. I'm struggling," I said before I could stop myself. I hadn't meant to spill my worries to him, but there it was. The developers, they're bulldozing everything, and no one's helping me. I'm at a loss here. Eddie frowned, the usual twinkle in his eyes replaced by a hard seriousness. "They've come after you, haven't they? You know, your granddad's name meant something around here. People might be scared to speak up, but you've got more friends than you think." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Eddie had always been a quiet observer, never one for drama. "You think so?" My voice wavered. "Everyone seems too afraid to do anything. It's like I'm fighting them alone." "Maybe that's because you're fighting in isolation," Eddie said, his tone gentle but firm. "You've got history on your side. Your grandfather was a man of integrity, and people remember that. They remember the way he stood up to the land developers back in the day." I felt a weight lift slightly off my shoulders. Eddie had always respected my grandfather. "You really think people will support me?" Eddie smiled again, this time with more warmth. "I know they will. They've just been waiting for someone to stand up first." I spent the next few weeks talking to Eddie and others from the community. Neighbors who had kept their distance started offering stories, facts, pieces of the history I hadn't even known. They talked about my grandfather's dealings with the land, how he'd refused to sell, even when the money was tempting. Eddie had a box of old papers, letters, and photos that he said my grandfather had passed on to him over the years. There were documents proving the land had never been sold, just as I had thought. But it wasn't just the facts that kept me going. It was the sense of connection. The community was slowly coming together. Eddie wasn't the only one who remembered my grandfather's legacy. Slowly, faces that had once been silent started speaking out. It was like a fire had been lit, and people realized they weren't as powerless as they'd once believed. "You've got a solid foundation now," Rachel Whitaker said when I showed her the newfound support from the community. "This changes everything." I felt something inside me shift. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Maybe this wasn't just my fight, it was a fight for everyone who cared about this land, about preserving its history. "You're not just fighting for your grandfather's name," Eddie had told me one night over coffee. "You're fighting for all of us. We stand with you, Sarah. Don't forget that." I never would. The weight I had been carrying felt a little lighter, the fight a little less impossible. I had allies now, real ones. And that gave me more strength than I'd realized I'd been missing. I walked into that courtroom, my hands shaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, with the weight of everything I was about to face. Eddie was by my side, his steady presence a quiet anchor, and Rachel, my lawyer, was ahead of me, her gaze focused, sharp as always. But all I could think about was the truth I was about to expose, the truth that had been buried under layers of lies. The developers were already seated, their smirks plastered on their faces like they had already won. Stephen Marks, the developer I'd confronted earlier, didn't even look at me as I entered. He was busy talking with his lawyer, Henry Stone, who flashed me a brief, dismissive smile. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, the tension building. I wasn't just up against them anymore. I was up against the entire system they had wormed their way into. The money, the influence, it was all stacked in their favor. But I had something they didn't, the truth. "Ms. Clark, you may present your evidence," the judge's voice broke through my thoughts. He was an older man, his tired eyes scanning the courtroom, but there was a certain weariness about him that made me wonder how many times he'd seen these types of cases, corporations steamrolling over the little guy. I stood up, my legs unsteady at first. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing louder than I'd expected. I took a deep breath and glanced over at Eddie, who gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. I turned to face the room, my eyes landing on the stack of documents I had gathered over the past few weeks, documents that proved the developers had never had legitimate claim to the land. I cleared my throat. "This," I began, holding up a stack of papers, "is the evidence that the sale of this land was fraudulent. These are the forged signatures. These are the documents that were tampered with to make it look like my grandfather had sold the property." I could hear the murmurs in the room, the disbelief in the air. But Stephen's lawyer, Henry Stone, jumped up immediately, his voice booming. "Objection, Your Honor. This is all circumstantial. These are just claims with no proof of intent." The judge nodded, but I didn't let his interruption shake me. "I've also spoken to witnesses, Your Honor," I continued. "Neighbors who remember my grandfather's dealings with the land. And there's more. Here is the original deed to the property. As you can see, it was never sold." I slammed the papers onto the table, watching as the weight of my words hit the courtroom. Henry opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was stunned. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, the intensity of it all starting to settle into my bones. My emotions surged, anger, pride, fear, all swirling together. But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. Not now. Not when I had come this far. "I didn't come here to just fight for land," I said, my voice rising. "I came here to fight for my family's legacy. For my grandfather's honor. This land wasn't just soil and stone. It was history, it was memory, it was our identity. And I'm not letting anyone take that away. Not for money, not for power." The room was silent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't falter. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was right there in front of them. The judge finally spoke. "We'll take a recess before the closing arguments." As I sat down, Eddie squeezed my shoulder, his voice low but filled with pride. "You did it, Sarah. You've got them now." And for the first time since this whole thing started, I believed him. I sat there in the courtroom, my hands trembling slightly as I waited for the judge's decision. My mind was racing, the past few months flashing through my head like a blur, court dates, sleepless nights, endless arguments. All of it led to this moment. The tension in the air was thick, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. What if it wasn't enough? What if the developers had more tricks up their sleeves? "Ms. Clark," the judge finally said, his voice steady and calm, "I have reviewed all the evidence presented. Based on the documents and testimonies, it is clear that the developer's claim to this property is invalid. The sale was fraudulent, and I am ruling in your favor." A wave of shock hit me first. I couldn't process it right away. I glanced at Eddie and Rachel, both of them with smiles spreading across their faces. Eddie was already standing, his arms wide, ready to embrace me. The weight of the battle I'd fought, the tears, the frustration, all of it seemed to melt away in that instant. Ms. Clark, the judge continued, the developers will also be required to pay restitution for the costs incurred during this dispute. I sat there for a moment, unable to believe what I was hearing. It felt surreal. But then, the flood of emotion hit me. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or shout in relief. I chose to stand. I had done it. I had won. As soon as the gavel came down, Eddie was by my side, pulling me into a tight hug. "You did it, Sarah. You really did it." I looked over at Rachel, who was grinning ear to ear. "We did it, Sarah," she said, her voice warm. "This victory is yours, but it's ours, too." I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for them, for everyone who had stood by me. The community, Eddie, Rachel, these were the people who had helped me through the darkest times, and now we were standing together in victory. The developers' smug expressions from earlier had all but disappeared. I saw Stephen Marks talking to his lawyer, his face twisted with frustration, but it didn't matter anymore. They'd lost. And I had won. I took a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. But beneath it all was something else, a fierce, unshakable pride. I had fought for something that mattered. I had fought for my grandfather's legacy, for the land that meant everything to me, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I walked out of the courtroom with Eddie and Rachel by my side, the world feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. The burden was gone. And I wasn't just Sarah Clark, the woman who inherited land. I was someone who had stood up for what was right, who had reclaimed her history and protected the future. I was confident now, not just in the victory I had won, but in the person I had become. And I knew, deep down, that nothing could ever take that away from me. The weight of the victory was starting to settle in. The land was mine again. No developers, no lawyers, no lies. Just me, the land, and the community I had fought so hard for. It was surreal walking back onto the property after the court ruling. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over everything, making the place feel peaceful once again. But it wasn't the same peacefulness I had once known. This time, it was a peacefulness earned. I walked over to the old barn my grandfather had built, the wood weathered and worn, but still standing strong. He'd put so much of himself into this land, into everything he had created. I needed to honor that. I needed to make sure his legacy was protected, that the land wasn't just mine, but belonged to everyone who understood its significance. I started by reaching out to the community, telling them my plans. "I want this land to be a resource for all of us," I told them. "I don't want it turned into something that benefits just a few. I want to make sure it's here for future generations to enjoy." Eddie, Rachel, and a handful of others came over to help me. We began cleaning up the area, clearing the debris from the construction site that had once been there. We planted flowers around the edges of the property, built benches, and even restored some of the old structures. It felt good to get my hands dirty, to feel the earth beneath my fingertips. For the first time in a long while, I was doing something that wasn't just about survival, it was about creating something lasting. "You've done it, Sarah," Eddie said as he wiped sweat from his brow. "This place, this land, it's in good hands now. It's more than just your grandfather's legacy. It's yours now, too." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Eddie was right. It wasn't just my grandfather's anymore. It was mine. And it was more than just land, it was a symbol. A symbol of all the struggles I'd gone through, of everything I'd fought for. And now, it was a symbol of something good, something right. Rachel came over with a smile. "I think your grandfather would be proud of what you're doing here," Sarah. You've shown more strength than most people could ever dream of. I smiled, though I still felt the exhaustion of the battle lingering in my bones. I never thought I'd be the one to fight for this, I admitted, but I've learned so much along the way. I've learned to trust myself. To fight for what's right, even when it feels impossible. I could feel the transformation inside me. I was no longer the unsure woman who had inherited this property. I had become someone who knew what it meant to stand up for something important, to fight for justice, even when it seemed like the world was stacked against me. I was a champion for my family's legacy, for my community, and for everything this land represented. Let's make sure it stays that way, Rachel said, giving me a knowing smile. I agreed. This wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of something new. And I was ready for whatever came next. I stood at the edge of the land, the familiar rustle of the wind in the trees like a quiet whisper, and I felt something shift inside me. The battle was over. The developers were gone, the land was mine, and my grandfather's legacy was safe. But I hadn't just won a legal battle, I had found something much more valuable. I had found my strength. I closed my eyes, letting the sun warm my face. Everything felt different now. The weight I had carried for so long, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant feeling of being overwhelmed, had lifted. In its place was something lighter, something stronger. I had fought for what was right, not just for myself, but for my family, for my community. I had faced down powerful people who thought they could take what was mine, and I had won. But it wasn't just the victory that mattered, it was the person I had become in the process. You okay? Eddie's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see him standing a few feet away, looking at me with that same reassuring smile he'd had through the entire fight. I nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Yeah. Just thinking. Eddie stepped closer, resting his hand on the fence beside me. You've come a long way, Sarah. You've turned this place around, and you've brought the community together. I glanced at him, feeling a surge of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. Or without everyone who stood by me. He chuckled. You did the hard part. You fought for what was right, and we all saw that. That's why we helped. I let his words sink in. For so long, I had felt like I was fighting alone. But I wasn't. Eddie, Rachel, the neighbors, they had all shown up when I needed them most. The same people I had once thought would turn their backs on me had become my strength. I've learned a lot through all this, I said, my voice quiet but steady. It's not just about the land or the victory. It's about standing up for what matters. About fighting when it feels impossible. You've earned it, Eddie said, giving me a sidelong glance. You earned the right to protect this place. And you did it the right way. I looked out at the land again, feeling a deep sense of peace. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, but now, with the battle behind me, I could finally breathe. This wasn't just land, it was a connection to everything I'd lost, and everything I had reclaimed. My grandfather's memory, my family's history, it was all wrapped up in this place. And I had protected it. I turned to face Eddie, a new confidence settling in my chest. Whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. I've learned that you don't back down when you know you're right. And I'm not afraid anymore. Eddie smiled. You're a force, Sarah. Don't forget that. I didn't think I would. Because standing here, on the land I fought so hard for, I knew that nothing could take this away from me. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. And no matter what happened next, I would always stand tall.